Hi guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. We're looking at a topic that could be considered the most important 20th century event in Asia. I'm talking about the partition of India, as in the splitting of British India into two separate entities, India and Pakistan. Both countries in their modern versions have only existed since 1947, and in the case of East Pakistan, which would later become Bangladesh, it's only been around since 1971. Before 1947, all of these countries were one united political entity known as British India. As all of you would no doubt be aware, India was under British control for a long period of time. Most of you would also be aware that the British were highly skilled at the age-old colonial technique of divide and conquer, where local communities were deliberately pitted against each other and kept in a state of antagonism in order to make it easier for them to impose large-scale control. And this was systematically done by the British in India as well, where the Hindus and Muslims were constantly treated and recognized as two distinct, almost polar entities. By the way, there's no point in just blaming the British for this. The Hindus and Muslims were already doing a good job of it, even without British encouragement. But before the British arrived, India was subjected to many Islamic invasions for several centuries. And even though the majority was Hindu, there was a big, vibrant, strong Muslim population as well. And throughout the centuries, there were scholars and intellectuals who put forward what is known as the two-nation theory, as in that the subcontinent consisted of two nations rather than one, a Hindu one and a Muslim one. And even though many spoke about it in different forms, these discussions nonetheless were still in the realm of theory, because the British Empire was unshakable at that point. So whether the Hindus and Muslims saw themselves as separate was irrelevant, since they were all British subjects. Once the freedom struggle picked up momentum, however, and once serious discussions started being held about the future of the region when the British left, that is when real heated political divisions began. A party known as the All India Muslim League propelled what was known as the Pakistan movement, which basically stated that when the British left, India must be partitioned, with the Muslim majority areas being recognized as a new sovereign nation called Pakistan. They said that the Muslims of India needed their own country. So the Indian political class itself got split into two major sides. What was known as the Indian National Congress, so Gandhi, Nehru, etc. on one side, and the All India Muslim League, headed by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, on the other. The Indian Congress wanted it to stay as one country, and the Muslim League wanted partition. The British were initially reluctant to partition India during the 20s and 30s, but then World War II happened. And here, most Indian freedom fighters antagonized the British with their position. Gandhi, for instance, started the Quit India movement only in 1942, when the Japanese were at the gates of Burma at that time, which seriously undermined the British war effort. Freedom fighters like Subhash Chandra Bose even teamed up with the Japanese to fight the British. So this angered the Crown a lot. The Muslim League, on the other hand, was firmly in support of the British throughout World War II. And the British, once they eventually became one of the primary victors of the war, rewarded the Muslim League for their compliance by giving them exactly what they had wanted. The British said that when they left, there will be two separate nations. And it was basically a smart play, tactical play by the Muslim League, and a counterproductive move by the Indian Congress. And once the British themselves had decided that this was going to be the case, there was nothing anybody could do to prevent that. With the end of the Second World War, we've got to remember that the British had no choice but to quickly leave. British society had already become very anti-empire at that point, and even starting from the 20s, it had already become obvious that they were going to leave at some point of time. The 1919 massacre in Amritsar, the famines in India, Gandhi's growing international popularity, all of this made the British themselves question the idea of empire and of whether they should be staying in India. But World War II was the real final nail in the coffin. The British were nearly bankrupt from the war, and while the conquest of India had started with them plundering all of India's wealth, by the time the 1940s rolled around, the expenditure of having to maintain such a large colony was sucking them dry, and they could no longer afford the logistical cost of owning India. And because of this, it wasn't an organized, systematic withdrawal either. They just drew arbitrary lines dividing the region and left. They gave the subcontinent to the Hindus and the northwest and northeast to the Muslims. The British cartographers never even bothered to visit these places, and in some cases, the lines that they drew dividing India and Pakistan would literally go through houses. So if you lived in the Punjab or Bengal regions, one part of your house could have been in India and the other in Pakistan. That's how shoddy and unprofessional the British were when they partitioned the region. And therefore, in 1947, two separate countries were born instead of one, India and Pakistan. The violence that followed between the Hindus and Muslims was catastrophic. Numbers that would make many modern day massacres pale in comparison. There were millions of Hindus in the areas that had now become Pakistan fleeing to India, and there were millions of Muslims in the area that had now become India fleeing to Pakistan. There was this visceral sense of hatred between the two communities, leading with widespread riots and pogroms, mass murder, mass rape. Nearly 100,000 women were abducted by the other side and kidnapped to either India or Pakistan. About 2 million people were killed in the riots overall, and about 20 million people were displaced and left homeless. And to this day, Asian geopolitics, particularly South Asian geopolitics, is still dictated by the bloodbath out of which both of these countries were born on that fateful day. And that is a 7-minute snapshot of the partition of India. If you like content like this, please don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.